This is Iowa attorney Tim Semelroth, one of the co-authors of the Law Guide to Iowa Workers' Compensation Claims. Recently, the Iowa State Bar Association asked me to give a presentation about the basics of Iowa workers' compensation law to a group of brand new attorneys. While I was preparing, I realized that the talk I was putting together for these new attorneys was very similar to the information I share with injured workers and their families when they come into my office every day. If you were injured on the job, understanding the basics of Iowa workers' compensation law is very important. If you understand the basics, you know your rights. If you understand the basics, you know whether or not you're getting the work comp benefits you're entitled to. If you understand the basics, you know whether you need an attorney to help you after a work injury. What you are about to see are clips from my speech to the Iowa State Bar Association. I believe these clips will help injured workers and their families understand what they need to know to protect themselves in the Iowa workers' compensation system. During these clips, watch closely for this check with an attorney symbol. This symbol will appear on the screen when I'm describing a situation where an injured worker should consult with an attorney. If I'm talking about a situation that applies to you when this symbol appears, remember to check with an experienced attorney on that issue so you get the Iowa workers' compensation benefits you deserve. If you're an injured worker, you are probably scared, you're probably frustrated, and you're probably concerned that nobody's going to come and help you. So what can a worker do if they don't think they're getting what they deserve? They can file a petition with the Division of Workers' Compensation for a hearing, as long as they've given notice of their injury within 90 days, and they filed a petition within either 2 years of the date of the injury or 3 years from the date of the last weekly benefit check. The state of Iowa's workers' compensation system is where you end up when you are injured on the job. An employee, and that's important too, you got to be working for somebody, qualifies for Iowa workers' compensation benefits if you were injured in Iowa. Second, if you work for an employer with a place of business in Iowa, you could also qualify for workers' compensation benefits if you live in Iowa or if you are principally working in Iowa. Iowa workers' compensation covers most health conditions that are caused by work activities. And that includes disease or hearing loss that's caused by workplace exposure. It also includes pre-existing conditions that are aggravated or worsened by work. And so that means maybe you have pre-existing arthritis. But if your job every day working in the factory is aggravating that, or if your job every day is making your condition worse, then potentially workers' compensation coverage applies. So who's in charge? That's the next question. Who's in charge? Who can I go to get answers? Iowa workers' compensation is run by a state agency, the Iowa Workforce Development Agency, and in particular, there is an appointed state official, the Iowa Workers' Compensation Commissioner. People will often ask themselves, do I have to be here? And unfortunately, the answer is that in almost all circumstances, Iowa workers' compensation is the only remedy for an employee for a work injury against their employer. So you can't sue your employer under most circumstances for a work injury. So what are your rights? And this is where we start getting into the nitty-gritty. For all practical purposes, there are three big types of benefits that an injured worker is entitled to in Iowa. First are medical benefits. Second are temporary disability benefits. And third are permanent disability benefits. When it comes to medical benefits in the Iowa workers' compensation system, it's a good news, bad news sort of thing. The good news is that work comp must pay for all reasonable and necessary medical care that's required because of your work injury. The bad news is Work comp gets to choose where the injured worker goes to receive those benefits. So in other words, the employer gets to choose the doctor. If work comp is denying recommended medical care, if a doctor is saying that you need a particular type of medical care because of your work injury, an attorney can file what's called a petition for alternative medical care. An attorney can ask the commissioner to order the employer to authorize that treatment. Under workers' compensation law in Iowa, the expense of going to an authorized doctor is part of medical benefits, and that's something that the employer should be paying. Now I want to turn to the second type of benefits, temporary disability benefits. Now, in general, an employee qualifies for temporary disability benefits when they are recovering from a work injury and they are missing time from work, and therefore they're missing their wages, their regular wages, because they're recovering. What I tell clients when they come in, I say, has a doctor taken you off work? Did the authorized doctor take you off work to heal after this work injury? If the answer is yes, then are you getting your paycheck? Are you still getting your regular paycheck? And for most of those workers, the answer is no. If I'm not working, I'm not getting a paycheck. What is supposed to happen is either the employer or their insurance company is supposed to be paying that worker temporary disability benefits until they go back to work and start getting their paycheck again, or when they're declared to be at maximum medical improvement, which means that they're as good as they're going to get. They're paid based upon your weekly benefit rate. The weekly benefit rate is something less than what you would get if you were still working. In fact, it can't be more than 80% of your spendable earnings, so 80% of your take-home pay. But in most situations, it's less. When you go to calculate your weekly rate, they're supposed to take a look at your marital status, how many dependents you have, what your average earnings were in the 13 weeks before your injury. And because it's complicated, because it involves sitting down and going through payroll records and asking a lot of follow-up questions with an injured worker, we find in our office that 75% of the people who come in and are getting temporary disability benefits are getting paid at the right rate, but 25%, 1 in 4 injured workers who come into our office, are not being paid at the right weekly benefit rate. Another thing that an attorney can do to help an injured worker, and that is if an injured worker thinks that the amount that they're being paid for temporary disability benefits, their weekly benefit rate, seems too low, an attorney can double check the calculations. There are strict rules that apply to when injured workers are supposed to be receiving those weekly benefit checks. And in fact, Iowa law says that if you're not receiving your weekly benefit checks promptly, the employer or the insurance company owes interest on those payments. Also, if there's not a good reason for why they're late, they have the potential of also having to pay penalty benefits to the injured worker. An attorney can ask for the payment of interest or penalty benefits if that situation is occurring for an injured worker. So that takes us to the third kind of benefit, the third of the big three, and that's permanent disability benefits. An injured worker qualifies for permanent disability benefits if they've reached maximum medical improvement and they still have a permanent loss of function. The next question, of course, is, well, how do you calculate that?